I divide the question I want to ask into sort of three parts. Maybe we'll do it one at a time. If I look at this, one of the things that's interesting to me is here are people who've really done extraordinary and very exciting things, very eclectic things. In fact, in this case, we have a lot of different examples of how things came up. So I divide into three pieces. First, how you came up with the idea and how difficult was it to get it off the ground would be one topic, which would be interesting. A second topic would be how you got people interested in participating with it. And the third was related to how you think you keep it going over time. And I think those are all interesting kinds of topics. Why don't we start with the first, and we can go down the panel, or if somebody gets very excited, they can raise their hand. And perhaps the first time you talk, you could repeat your name and remind people what project you were on. So start with sort of how did the idea come to you and why you thought it might resonate and some of the issues that you faced when you wanted to get it off the ground. So why don't we start here?
George Clack, State Department, Democracy Video Challenge. It all begins, I think, with a visionary leader at a fairly high level. We had a new Deputy Assistant Secretary in our bureau for producing content for international audiences, and he gathered together a group of people who were brainstorming about what we could do in the video area. The idea of Web 2.0 had reached our ears, and basically a bunch of fairly not very clued-in people came up with the idea of the Democracy Video Challenge contest on YouTube. The second crucial thing was at a higher level in the State Department. The Undersecretary at that point was James Glassman from the previous administration, and he was an ex-journalist. He got the idea instantly, and he gave it a lot of high-level support and ran interference for it. Now, since we have had a change of administrations with the Obama administration, we've heard nothing good but good things about this project. But that's the basic start of it.
Mike McCaffrey with Architecture Humanity. My boss came up with the idea and the organization. As the Architecture Humanity was founded 10 years ago, so during 7 or 8 of those, there was no open architecture network, and it was really hard running the projects for offline and sending poster boards and stuff around. So it was really apparent that we needed to use web technology to help manage the projects around the world and also host competitions. And it was actually pretty easy getting users involved. Everyone really likes the idea of the organization, likes the idea of the site. And the problem is, or not problem, but we're looking at helping keep people involved on an ongoing basis to keep them coming back and keep them learning new things, keep them submitting their ideas, and keep projects updated and try and do that more effectively.
My name is Rita J. King, and that's my name on Twitter also. I didn't have a slide, so. My collaborator, Joshua S. Fouts, came up with this idea and came to me and asked me to co-direct the project with him, Understanding Islam Through Virtual Worlds. And it was originally framed as an event series in Second Life. Second Life is often and well used for events, but there's a greater use for it as well, which is the fact that there's already millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people on a regular basis who use the platform, and they're from all around the world. And so my idea was to reframe it as a quest. I'm an investigative reporter by trade before I started my company, Dancing Inc. Productions, and we did this project as senior fellows at the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs, and with support from the Lounsbury Foundation. And so once we had that support in place, we started immediately, and as we traveled around the world talking to people about this, people were fascinated by the use of the space. Twitter, for example, is a lot easier to jump in and start using, so it's grabbed a lot of media attention. On the other hand, virtual worlds, because of their cartoonish appearance, have deceived people into believing that it's a haven for all sorts of behaviors that are deceptive, and frankly, there's all kinds of demographics of people using the physical world in different ways, and so you'll find that in virtual worlds. But when we started interviewing people, I just want to briefly tell one snippet that will be of interest to demonstrate the value of this. For the virtual Hajj to Mecca, we met 2 male avatars at the entrance to the virtual Hajj to Mecca, one of whom was from North Caucasus, which is a blood-soaked region with a lot of issues related to Islam. And we were talking in text, and I asked about ijtihad, and he thought I asked about jihad, and got into a very heated debate about this. And I asked him if he could go back and reread the chat log to see that, in fact, I hadn't asked about jihad, and he did. And then he apologized to me for the misunderstanding. I apologized to him for underestimating the language barrier, and then we spoke for about an hour after that, and he gave us a lot of valuable information, and then that we used throughout the project. So it was an interesting process, but very real for all its virtuality.
Hi, Greg Whisenant from Crime Reports. I started, it was while I was living here in Washington, it was years ago, and I inadvertently facilitated a crime. I let someone into my building that I didn't know who later burglarized the building. And of course, I found out on videotape when the building manager knocked on my door with a police officer. And I went to, in response to that, I went to a meeting, just a neighborhood watch meeting, and the real takeaway that I had was that there's no lack of interest on the part of the public. It's not because people aren't interested. There was a woman there specifically who raised her hand and said, look, I got followed by some guy who was trying to corner me in a parking lot, and it turned out he'd done this with 5 or 6 other women in the previous 6 weeks. And she had gotten away, and I think he was just intending to mug her, but she said, why couldn't I find out about that? That seems like something I should be able to know about, and the media doesn't report on it. And I think that was what I really understood at that time, was that people want to get involved. It's just for the inability for them to do it. And I think the will is there on the part of the police departments as well. And we saw it, I saw when we first started, I saw it to just create that connection between law enforcement agencies and members of the public.
Hi, I'm Brian Sobel from Are You Safe? And I guess Are You Safe took birth because I had worked with some cohorts on one of the apps for democracy, in the initial apps for democracy, and we ended up, after the competition, saying, hey, we realized we had all this data already kind of in our database, and said, whatever innovative or fun things can we do with it? And we were interested in playing with iPhone apps because none of us had developed one yet, and so we decided that'd be an interesting thing to try out, and I guess that leads to what was kind of a disappointing thing, or some friction we realized, is that, so we were really lucky, data was available, we did it right around the time of the inauguration, so a lot of people were going to be in DC with the iPhones, we thought there'd be a lot of people to use the app, and so we're like, oh, okay, what's next? Super Bowl's coming up, so we tried to, all right, it's in Tampa, and so we went and looked, and Tampa had crime data, but it wasn't at address level, like incident level addresses, it wasn't in a level of granularity in which we could create a hyper-local app. I might say if at the street corner instead of at the town. And so anyway, that's been one of the challenging things is finding data that meets kind of the rawest requirement.
Before I go on to my next question, just to see if there's anyone in the audience already who is willing to ask a question. I think I see a hand back here in the middle. Do we have the roving mics? Yes. Yeah, while we're waiting for that, apropos of nothing, I will say, in the spirit of this being the Peacekeeper discussion, and in the knowledge that you're not supposed to say anything negative about anything else, as a native Washingtonian myself, and as a long time Washington Capitals hockey fan, I found out that Steve Raddick, who moderated the first panel, is a Pittsburgh Penguins fan. And I just want to let everybody know that I won't do anything about it today, but that Alexander Ovechkin could kick Sidney Crosby's mustache. Okay, so there's a question, I think, over here.
Yes, thank you. Several of the presentations today have showcased great apps if you have an iPhone. Why is there the focus on the iPhone? It seems to limit those who can't afford an iPhone, which we talked about kind of with DC, or if you just don't want to switch to AT&T.
Well, I don't know. Were there some iPhone?
Yeah, I can speak to that. As a developer, in considering other platforms so it'd be very easy for us to port our app to, well, it wouldn't take a whole lot of effort to port it to other platforms like BlackBerry or Android, which we've explored, but to help us recoup some of the cost of hosting and developing the app, there just isn't the user base that's lined up in the iTunes store, totally trumps that of any other platform, and so I'm not sure that we would have the usage. But we could consider other platforms, like maybe making it web available.
We have the iPhone app as well, which we're gonna expand on. So I think, you know, this is really a starting point. I think it's probably both for Are You Safe and for us that we eventually will expand to many devices. I think I just showed the screenshot from the iPhone just because, you know, the iPhone's the iPhone. But anyone armed with I think text messaging will become equally important, and that obviously can be done from any phone, and then we'll expand to other platforms as well.
Any other? Are there questions in the back?
Kathleen Smith from clearjobs.net. I've been the one back here screaming with questions. Glad I finally got the microphone. I'm curious as to the selection of these different projects, because we're looking at peacekeeping from a crime standpoint and from democracy standpoint, but how we're talking about peace in general, and why each one of you sort of selected your presentation or wanted to participate in something that was considered peacekeeping.
So,
I said this during the presentation, but I think it bears repeating that peace is not the absence of conflict. And I think that there's a lot of misperceptions about the binary nature of war and peace. War being the complete escalation of violence to a lethal condition for many people, and peace being this illusory idea that somehow everyone will get along. And I think one thing we know about the human condition is that there will always be conflict, but conflict is what drives progress and innovation in many ways. And so I believe that the digital culture in toto provides a forum for people to become the protagonists at the center of their own stories, and in being heard and inhabiting one another's ideas, which is why we chose to do it in a virtual format, because people can build and inhabit and collaborate on alterations to mindscapes, which no other platform, including the physical world, unless you have billions of dollars, affords you. And so it's pretty amazing to see what people create together in a space. And so our feeling is that peace, not being the absence of conflict, how do you then channel it productively to use it to build toward the greater good? And then what is the greater good? And that, I think, is the discovery that we're trying to make together globally.
I wouldn't mind a quick shot at that one, too.
yeah, and I might just understanding that the panel didn't pick the title. Perhaps if all the panelists might give at least a couple sentences about, again, sort of summarizing what they were trying to achieve, perhaps in a larger sense, by doing this in the same way that Rita had done now. So, yeah, why don't you take that? Okay.
Yes. How does the Democracy Video Challenge bring about peace in the world? Tough question, and really the answer is a very long-term answer. There's I think, a pretty well-documented view that democracies tend not to attack each other, not every time, not every place. The State Department, for many years, when it talks about democracy, and we in the United States have been for democracy for a very long time, there's a kind of subtext that goes out in all the messages that have gone out from the State Department. And the message is sort of like, if you could only be more like we Americans, then you would be happy, then you would be prosperous, then you would be a good country, then you could join the rest of the world. Well, what we're doing with this project is we're turning that upside down. We think the discussion is enough, and what we've discovered is that democracy is an incredibly potent word out there in the world. People have a lot of different presumptions and ideas about democracy. Some are very positive, some are quite negative, but for us, it begins with getting the discussion going. We think, in the end, we're likely to be more credible that way. That's not to say that there won't always be a place for President Obama or the Secretary of State making comments and saying democracy is a good thing, but this is a different way of approaching the same issue.
Other comments?
It seems that the most effective way to guarantee peace in the world is to ensure that the basic needs of people are met. And that's what our site is about. It's about getting people shelter and community and supporting their day-to-day lives. And that, more than anything else, will ensure peace. And you know, we're here today because we're trying to get more people involved in the platform, both in design and also just contributing their technical expertise and whatnot to making it easier for people to get access to the design skills they need to have their basic needs met.
Yeah, it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And we're sort of an extension kind of higher up the pyramid, I guess you could say, But I think people generally have a genuine desire to contribute, and that's what we're really trying to do, is to create that capacity to have an engagement, and really what's been missing is that technological piece, which I don't want to sound too trite, but Web 2.0 makes that possible because we can move all that processing up into the cloud and take away a lot of the cost and make it really seamless and easy. So that perceived injustice of not getting access to data. I mean, you think about people don't want to take responsibility for local crime problems because they don't know what they are. And I certainly feel disenfranchised if I don't know exactly what's happening or even something close to what's happening. So getting access to that data is the first part, the first step of creating the partnership.
I don't know what I have to add. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll pass.
Are there other, again, are there other questions in the audience for right now? So one of the things that was asked in a sort of a different way a couple of times earlier, surprises. I might ask, in addition to surprises, if you felt you learned something about the stakeholders you dealt with that was unexpected. In other words, that you started off with some suppositions as to what would be the nature of the people you interacted with and how you'd interact. Were there things you've learned and surprised you about that interaction, or the people who you actually reached out to that you didn't anticipate doing, or the level, pro or con of interest, things of that? Why don't we start on the left?
I think people being enabled by kind of the mashups of the information that the government has. I think so from citizens, I think we've had a really positive feedback. I think that I feel like the government, I guess maybe it's surprising that they're interested in sharing the data, but there are bureaucracy, I guess, gets in the way. But I think the individuals are interested in kind of exposing that because they are interested in exposing their data.
I guess I worked in government. I worked here in Washington on the Hill, and so I had a little experience with government. But I was surprised at just the. I hate to say it almost, but I was surprised at the level of interest among government. I mean, this is the time right now to take advantage of these new tools. There is a ton of momentum out there, and one of the previous panelists said that it takes leadership at every level. I absolutely concur. There are a lot of people who can kill a project, but there are a lot of people who can move it along, and I think this is a great time to be in government. It's as oxymoronic as that sound, it really is an exciting time.
I was surprised by the effect of the internet on the expression of religious ideals and the expression of spirituality and faith. And because we traveled through Southeast Asia, the Middle East, North America, and Europe to work on this project, is in addition to the virtual component, the kaleidoscopic expressions of Islam globally really caught me off guard, and particularly with regard to second-generation Muslims in a lot of countries learning to adapt, and the people in those countries learning to adapt. The concept, I'll just leave you with the word intercreation, is the word that we came away with and we're moving forward with, because people are learning to create something new together, and we were surprised by the manifestation of that globally.
Yeah, just before we go there, just one comment. I think that this illustration of the use of virtual environments is really an example of how this activity will occur going forward, where you'll have this commingling of virtual and real environments where people, again, particularly the younger they are, will find this very natural in terms of the interaction. It'll probably be disquieting to people as old as me that it won't bother them that they're in and out of it and won't differentiate between it.
Snow crash.
I don't have that much to add. I just want to reiterate the same thing, that the amount of excitement around the world has really surprised us, in the fact that for Architecture of Humanity, we have several people contacting us each week about starting chapters in new countries and new cities all around the world, and it's kind of humbling. But
and I think interesting about the application that you talked about, that here we have not just the power of social networking 2.0 to interact with the citizens or interact between government entities, but here we have people who are intermediaries themselves that are supporting the citizen that you're causing to get together. So you're actually, in effect, optimizing the supply chain to government services along the way, which is a very, it's very interesting how this group is eclectic in that fashion.
Our big surprise was intellectual property rights. It really shouldn't have been. The State Department, of course, and especially our movie industry partners really believe in intellectual property rights. Once we got on YouTube, YouTube believes in them too. They have written rules requiring you to observe copyright. But once we got onto YouTube, we found that a huge number of people entering the contest were just ignoring those rules. It would have been quite embarrassing if one of the winners, for example, had ripped off somebody's song. It was mostly a problem less with images than with music. So what happened, we kept using the phrase due diligence. At a certain point, due diligence would be done. We got to the point where we had about 48 videos left in the contest, and we had a lawyer take a look at them. And basically, he had eliminated about 2/3 of those. So that's how we got our 18 semifinalists, because they could not stand up to good scrutiny. You know, when somebody's using a Beatles song, chances are pretty good they didn't get the rights to that song. We're going to fix this for next year, though. Basically, we've made an arrangement with a website called Rumblefish. So if you're going to use music in your video next year, and you better use music, you can use licensed material from Rumblefish, or it has to be original music, and you have to be able to prove it's original.
By the way, I realized that, of course, doing everything here backwards, I never actually introduced myself, other than I'm Dan Mintz. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at CSC for the Civil and Health Services Group. Through January of this year, for 3 years, I had the honor of serving as the CIO at the U.S. Department of Transportation. Position I've said a number of times was the best job I ever had. For all of you who have not served in government that have the opportunity to do so, I'd highly recommend you taking it. It's a wonderful experience. The people within government are wonderful, wonderful people. You'll feel better about yourself for the participation. I believe we have a number of minutes left. Again, let me look to see if we have something out in the audience. Otherwise, I do have another question to ask. Over here.
Thanks. So this goes to the gentleman at the State Department. Why I deal with intellectual property all the time, and was one of the reasons why New York State Senate was the first state Senate to adopt Creative Commons policy. We're the only state legislature that has a Creative Commons policy, by the way. So why would the State Department not adopt a open, permissible license that's along the lines of Creative Commons, or at least promote it?
We looked at a number of different things when we were coming up with a way to deal with the problem for next year. All I can say is that for the first year of the contest, we were sort of following along on our partner on YouTube, and we didn't quite realize what we were getting into, the kind of massive nature of the problem. Once we started dealing with it for next year, we looked at a number of different solutions, and I wasn't in on the final discussions as to what happened with the Creative Commons, why we went with Rumblefish, but we did go with a sort of an alternative in that direction.
Yeah, just let me add to this, the moderator will just, as in the position I had at the Department of Transportation, I will tell everybody who has not been inside, these topics, which are questions are very reasonable, they're very complicated for the government in terms of what kind of licensing, how to make information available. There's a lot of regulatory authority that limits the freedom, in some cases that occasionally will require legislative action. Sometimes it's a wonder at how much is done and how open it is, as opposed to the issues that we sometimes face in their defense. Yes?
I just wanted to say that Creative Commons is essentially one of the cornerstones of our site, and that we wouldn't have been able to do without it. Many of the projects on the site are released under Creative Commons licenses, and almost all the competition entries, which essentially means that people can adopt the designs either whole or in part for their own projects, and that's what we're really trying to accomplish with it, that actually create a whole library of design solutions, and Creative Commons really makes it happen. So,
other questions from the audience? So I have a question. For those of you who have been thinking about the next generation of what you're doing, so not everybody has to answer this, but for those of you who have been thinking about a next generation, could you give us some thoughts about what might be on the horizon, and then as part of that, what you think you'll add to it to make it more, if you will, make it more robust in terms of that next generation? Anyone want to raise a?
Sure.
Yeah.
think, unfortunately, like the current innovation in, I guess, application innovation is really obstructed by the availability of data. And I think the next stage, not of Are You Safe, but of this, what this movement is doing, or might be responsible for, is opening up lots of data. And that, I don't even know, it's going to be crazy what happens after that, because it's going to go from a couple people having data and having the ability to create applications around that to really no one holding that, leverage. And so the amount of applications and the innovative ways that data is mashed up is going to be unique. It's going to be great.
Thank you for articulating that point, which is, I think that is the basis of the platform. As we look at what's going to happen in the future, we will definitely create an API where anybody can write an application. I think we'll see law enforcement write their own applications that will analyze data and be able to publish those out to other agencies. But I think that's really that's the vision, is opening up the data. And I really can't overstate the power that the president and the legislature have in being able to require that there be a Web 2.0, not just a regular public role, but a Web 2.0 public role for different projects that are out there.
The last one comes off to be fairly quick.
I think it's important to remember that we are rapidly approaching, as this data is layered, we're approaching the concept of augmented reality and telepresence and increasingly mixed media realities. And so I think it's really important to recognize that this is an evolution in human consciousness and that we are entering something that has been previously impossible, which is the projection of our collective mindscapes through data and through our realities. And so as we plan for the future, what we're looking at is how will society layer these realities in ways that are productive and toward peace.
We have lots of different plans. Just keeping in mind with what people are saying here, data obviously is one of them. We're trying to map all of our projects out and actually get layers for climate change, our climate zones and material use. Yeah. And yeah. Data is good.
So I'd like to thank all of our panelists for speaking. It's remarkable, in my opinion. Really, we're at the beginning of this effort with 2.0 and how remarkable this set and the other applications that we've had. So a round of applause for all these people. And we should have the voting instructions. The voting instructions are on there.